Now let's look a little bit more further into the selectors section of our cheat sheet, which is this section number 3. Now selectors are very important because it basically tells CSS which elements specifically to apply the styles on. So let's take a look in our code. So in our page right now, we have a lot of P elements, a lot of paragraphs, right? It doesn't have to have the same sentence, but you may have sentence number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, right? Now, a few ways to uniquely identify different elements is number 1 is by ID. So basically in HTML, all elements can have an optional attribute called ID. So you say ID is equal to, and you give it a name. So let's say I'm just going to say first on this one. Save, and I'm going to do the same thing over here and call it second. So now save and refresh, and there's going to be no difference because IDs are simply unique identifiers and they basically do nothing. I mean, there's no functionality behind it. There's just a name that you apply to that particular element. It doesn't have to be on P, it can be on H1s or any different element. It doesn't really matter, all right? Now, the power comes that let's say you want to tell CSS that only apply special styles to an element with the ID of first, all right? So let's say if you want to do that, you're going to come to your styles and you're going to say, okay, what is the name of the ID? First, all right? And whenever you want to apply certain styles to a particular ID, you're going to append it with a hash sign like this. So basically this tells CSS that this first is actually a name of an ID. Just the way you're going to put an H1 over here without any hash, it tells CSS that, okay, this is an element name. So when you put a hash, it tells CSS this is an ID name that I need to look for. And the rest of the syntax is the same. So the selector is basically first, and you're going to put in a style. So let's say I'm going to say this one should be color, let's say black. All right, save, refresh, and you see this element with an ID of first is actually now black. Now, you may be asking, if you are noticing, is that this particular element is a P element and also it has an ID of first. So it has two of these things, right? Which is normal. But which style should it apply? Should it apply this general style of color red, or should it apply this more specific style of black? And the reason I say general and specific is because there are a lot of P elements. There can be a lot of P, right? But there's only going to be one element with an ID of first. So one other thing is that when you're writing these IDs, you cannot have duplicate first IDs. So you cannot make this one and this one both first. You cannot have the same name, so you cannot call it Aziz. The IDs have to be unique per page. So that's what I'm trying to get to, that you cannot have these duplicates. So there's only going to be one ID on that page. So that's a specific, selector. So a specific selector always takes precedence over a more general selector. The second rule for CSS priorities, priority of which style gets applied, is actually that the style which is written last takes precedence over a style which is written above in general, right? But of course, even if I made this right in the top, this is going to work because this is a more specific selector. All right, save, refresh. That did not work. Oops, I did not save this particular HTML. So if I save and I refresh, you see this is black now because this is a more specific selector.